Well, we very much hope there will be. These are very good surface indications that are now being excavated, but our hopes are chiefly founded on the fact that over here, in the other room, just over this wall, there did come to light a couple of days ago a magnificent deposit of pottery dating to about 1450 BC, which is just contemporary with the great destruction horizon of all the Minoan sites in the island of Crete. And some 5 or 6 of those pieces are unique. For example, this one here, which is an extraordinary vessel decorated with figure of 8 shields, perhaps copied from the great wall painting in the palace.
It's just a small vase, isn't it?
Yes, it's about 7 inches high, but the shields and the shield straps are very carefully delineated. But it wasn't that was the only surprise, because the interior consists of a very curious cone, which is let down, presumably as some kind of filler, perhaps for pouring liquid offerings, into the interior of the vase.
So you've got set inside the vase a thing that's a bit like an ice cream cone.
Yes, it looks rather like that, and you'll see here on the little handle on the shoulder is a small hole, which presumably is a sort of gurgle hole, as my wife called it, to give air when the thing was being filled, to allow some air to escape. It's a rather complex vessel. It was a somewhat similar one found by Professor Marinatos at Thera at Santorini a few years ago.
But this is the first one found on Crete?
As far as I'm aware. But those pieces, as I say, were unique. But the prize piece from the group in the corner of this room was this really lovely alabastron, perhaps an oil jar for scented oil or perfume, and it's decorated in the famous Minoan marine style with starfish and rockwork and coral patterns all over it. It's a unique specimen of the style and almost completely preserved except for the broken lip.
It's absolutely beautiful, isn't it?
It really is a magnificent specimen, and I'm sure is going to go straight into the Heraclean Museum when we've finished with it.
Museums on Crete have been getting a lot of material from the site I've come to now, in the western half of the island, where it was once believed the Minoans hardly penetrated. The fallacy of that belief is clearly demonstrated in the discovery of this large cemetery at Amenia in the hills behind Rethymnon. It's the biggest late Minoan cemetery yet found, and what's so interesting is that it's a major site that dates to the period after the final destruction, and there's certain to be a totally unknown town nearby. Well, when that's located, it should provide a marvellous opportunity for research into this late Minoan period. And for several years now, Yannis Tsadakis, the director of the museum at Hania, has been scrambling through this thorny undergrowth and outcrops of rock to explore and excavate the tombs cut deep into the hillside. All this area is honeycombed with tombs, and it was really a matter of luck that archaeologists got to hear about it. It was actually a badger who did the first field survey and excavation. Living in a tomb and finding that some Minoan vases were getting in the way, he dragged them out and dumped them on a path in front of some children on their way to school. Well, I don't know what happened to the badger, whether he was rehoused or not, but he's not here now, as we look down a flight of stairs towards the entrance of one of these tombs. It's a spectacular entrance, isn't it?
The entrance of the tomb is in a depth of 21 feet, and the length of the passage, which is called Dromos, is about 60 feet long.
And look at the way the passage is made. The walls don't go straight down. They're slope up towards the top.
That's the usual architecture we find in all examples we have of tomb architecture in Crete and Minoan Crete.
So let's move down this flight of stairs onto the landing, and then further down towards the entrance of the tomb. What sort of stone have they had to cut this into?
Very strong limestone.
It must have been quite a job.
It was quite a job for several months, without any doubt. We can see here this line, which is where the tombstone was put.
So we're right at the entrance to the tomb now.
Yes.
It's a crouching job, this, and then once you get through the doorway, which is like a small tunnel, I suppose 5 or 6 feet along, you then enter into the tomb itself, and one has come into a very spacious chamber, and certainly big enough to walk around in comfort. And in the centre,
yes, in the centre,
a huge pillar.
A huge pillar, yes.
Now this is carved out of the living rock, isn't it?
Carved of the living rock, yes, out of the living rock, and the benches around.
Now, but what did you find in here when you forced your way through that tombstone?
Well, here we found 2 coffins out of pottery, decorated, where the dead were put in.
These are very large casks. I suppose about the size of a hip bath.
Yes, they are, yes,
with
actually.
With a pottery top.
With a pottery top, a cover. And around we found vases, bronzes, but this tomb was robbed and disturbed in antiquity, so the offerings were not found in the real position as they were put. But around we found other deads lying on the rock.
Other skeletons?
Other skeletons, yes, on the rock with the offerings around, the votive offerings. One of the most important finds was a dagger, a bronze dagger, with a piece of cloth on.
A piece of cloth? Surviving all this time?
Surviving all this time, in spite of the humidity of the area, and which is linen. We have coffins in a tomb, or 1, 2, maximum 3, and as well other burials which are lying on the floor.
So they didn't always use a coffin?
No, they did not always use a coffin, because the coffin, without any doubt, costs a lot and was very difficult to bake the coffin. They need special kilns for that. So not all the tombs have coffin, and the coffin is used only once. The tomb is used 2 or 3 times, but the coffin only once.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you found this place almost in isolation, a huge cemetery like this. But of course, a cemetery can't be totally isolated. There must be some sort of town or city or village associated with it. Given the size of this cemetery, 200
roughly 200 chamber tombs with at least 5 burials each.
So what sort of a town does that make it?
It must be a rather important town.
So the search for this mysterious town goes on.
It goes on as the excavation of the cemetery goes on. What we should like to have, is, if possible, would be aerial photographs, because that helps a lot. The site is very rocky and not very easy to walk, and also covered with trees. So sometimes it's really impossible to continue a survey the proper way.
While Yanis Tsadakis searches for his Minoan town, another excavation here on the south coast of Crete is uncovering a town with some surprising features. This place, quite near the palace of Festos, is called Commerce, and has a history that continued well after the final destruction of the big Minoan palaces, about 1400 BC. It covers about 6 acres, spreading up from the beach to the top of the cliff above us. And in one of the houses just a few weeks ago, Professor Joseph Shaw of Toronto University found a storeroom full of vases and pottery of all kinds just left where they were when the house collapsed, sometime in the 17th century BC. A collection of household pottery like this is rare enough. But even more exciting is this building found under the sand dunes down here near the beach. It's a Greek temple dating from about the 5th century BC. It's got at least 4 altars, and on one last year they found, beautifully preserved, a terracotta figure of a bull. But this season, only a couple of days ago, there was great excitement on the excavation when Professor Shaw made a most unexpected discovery under what looks like a column base. He describes it as a base for the temple's deity or cult statue, right up at the business end of the large temple complex. But how did you come to make this discovery, Professor Shaw?
In order to find out more about the time it was built, we had to go below the floor. A few slabs had been removed during antiquity. This is where we began. There's one over here on my far left. And there was another one, another gap, right where I'm sitting next to the column. We opened up one, just had a slab in it. Couldn't go down any further. We opened up another one, and we went down fairly far, but it was a very small hole. And I was intrigued by, let's say, this block here.
This block underneath the one you're sitting on?
Yes, and I dug down along the side. It was very difficult for the workmen reaching way down and in. My arms were a bit longer. And then bits of bronze began to appear, rather corroded, and more were coming up. The space was getting smaller and smaller. There were some little lumpy white things I could see in the rather half light that were going up. And then suddenly somebody said, "Look, it's a head." And I said, "A head?" I hadn't realized that I'd passed a head up to someone. It was a head of a baboon, and it was quite clear that we had something very interesting. A baboon-headed Egyptian god or goddess. And then when I was digging down further, I saw where the rest of it was. It was terribly difficult to get out because it was crammed between 2 slabs in antiquity. And then I had the thought that if I took some water and used it as a lubricant, it might free the rest of this little statue of Faience from where it was. And so we sloshed 2 cups of water way down to the point where it was, worked it around a bit, and slid right out. And we brought it up, and it was covered with mud, of course, at the time. We washed it off, and there was a great gasp as we looked at the rest of this very finely made figurine, representing a very important culture, of course, which we were all familiar with, and showing a direct link between this temple that we're working in and the great Egyptian civilization to the southeast of here, just across the Libyan Sea.
Well, what do you think this Egyptian figurine was doing here?
Well, it wasn't there by chance. Clearly, it had been placed there when the temple was being built as a dedication. And my own feeling is that this is only one of a number of things that we are going to be finding as part of a dedication for the temple, which may be incredibly important and tell us more about this particular sanctuary that we're working in at the present time.
Professor Shaw's schedule of work has many seasons to run, and there's likely to be more surprises coming out of Komos. Since Sir Arthur Evans's time, archaeology has added a greater depth to our view of this remarkable civilization that flourished from about 2000 BC until 1100 BC, when it mysteriously petered out altogether. Some archaeologists believe it was a massive earthquake following the cataclysmic eruption of the volcano on Santorini that knocked the Minoans down. But others see a more gradual end after a foreign invasion of Crete. Archaeology may one day provide more evidence to resolve this. And there's also the problem of the Minoan language, the one we call Linear A. One of the things that spurred Evans on in the early days was the hieroglyphic script on clay tablets he found, but he never managed to decipher it. And I'd like to ask you now, Peter Warren, just why, after all these years, no one's been able to crack the code?
The reason why we've not been able to, why the philologists have not been able to decipher the language is that we really have so few pieces to go on. The total corpus is still only between 300 and 400 compared with several thousand Linear B tablets for Mycenaean Greek. And really until very substantial finds are made of inscribed material, and that may well be the case, by the way. In recent years, we've had major discoveries at the palace at Hanyar and at Zakros, the palace there, and individual discoveries here and there of tablets. It may be that we shall recover a lot more material, but that is what is needed before we can unlock the key to the Minoan language. That, of course, is only one of a number of areas where we're looking in our archaeological and philological researches to gain further knowledge. One of the delightful things about the Minoans is that when you begin to conduct an excavation, as we're doing here at Knossos at the moment, you always get a surprise, something totally unexpected, which adds to our knowledge of this astonishing culture. If we took these excavations that at this particular moment you have been exploring, if we took them as a random sample, what do we have? We have there down at Komos a fascinating Minoan village from the period subsequent to the palaces. We knew very little about that before, the village way of life after the palace destruction. In Professor Sakilarakis' excavation, we have a wholly unexpected contribution to Minoan religion with the cult statue, which has been described from that site. Our own operations here at Knossos have revealed the best Minoan masonry immediately overlying the house remains which correspond to the destruction of the palace, so there's some fascinating questions to be solved there. And then our understanding of the way of life of the Minoan afterworld through very careful and meticulous excavation of cemetery sites, such as being carried out by the Ephor of Western Crete, Mr. Tsavakis at Armeni. Here we can have a most detailed understanding of burial customs through the large-scale excavation of a cemetery. Now these perhaps are a random sample, but they show you at once how varied, the minute people plunge in, international teams, missions here, plunge into excavation of Cretan sites, how varied the results are likely to be, and in their own way help to build up a picture, economic life, religious life, basic village life of the different ways of life of the Minoan people. So the contributions almost are there in the earth, and the minute you put your spade in, you're almost certain to be making a contribution. One is very lucky, really, with having the privilege of working here in Crete.